Do unions boost paychecks or just bust jobs? It's a question that's been debated for decades. And if you're like most people, you've probably heard strong opinions on both sides. Well, today we're going to dig into the facts, cut through the noise, and see what unions really mean for your paycheck and your job opportunities. And here's the kicker. If you stick around until the end, I'm going to reveal something shocking. It will surprise you. I'm going to tell you what the average American's paycheck could look like today if wages hadn't stagnated in the 1970s. You won't believe how big the difference is. And as always, I've included a reference guide in the video description with all the facts from today's video, so you can do your own research and learn more. And be sure to check it out and drop your thoughts in the comments. I always want to know what you think. Have you ever felt stuck in your job? Like no matter how hard you work, your paycheck just doesn't seem to move. You see costs rising everywhere. Groceries, rent, energy, but your pay isn't keeping up. You're not alone. Millions of people across the United States are feeling that same squeeze. And that raises a big question. Why? What if I told you one of the reasons might be tied to something you don't think about every day? The decline of unions. And here's the thing, whether you work in a union or not, the presence or absence of unions might have an impact on your paycheck and working conditions. Now, let's break it down. Back in the 1970s, about 25% of American workers were part of a union. This gave workers the power to collectively bargain for better wages and benefits. Unions fought to ensure that when worker productivity increased, wages rose alongside it. But since the 1970s, union membership has plummeted. Now only 10% of workers are unionized, with even fewer in the private sector, only about 6%. And here's the critical connection. As union membership dropped, wages stopped keeping pace with worker productivity. From 1948 to 73, wages and productivity grew together. But after the decline of unions, productivity kept rising while wages stagnated. According to the Economic Policy Institute, worker productivity increased by 77% between 73 and 2020, but wages only grew 12%. In other words, workers became more efficient and produced more, but the benefits of that productivity didn't show up in their paychecks. While unions can secure higher wages and better benefits, critics argue that these gains can come with downsides. For example, unions may increase labor costs, which could lead companies to raise prices for customers or even cut jobs to offset the costs. It could decrease business flexibility. Union contracts often include strict work rules and seniority-based promotions that limit a company's ability to adapt quickly to changes in the market or new technology. Now, this isn't to say unions don't work, but it's something businesses and workers have to weigh when considering unionization. Sometimes unions might unintentionally make it harder for a company to innovate or stay competitive. But remember, I've got that big surprise about the potential gains unions could have made for your paycheck. And it's coming up soon, so stick with me. Now picture this. Imagine you go to your boss alone and you ask for better pay, just you. I want better pay and better working conditions, but maybe you ask for health benefits or more reasonable hours. What are the chances that your one voice will make a huge difference? Your boss might listen, but at the end of the day, they know you're just one person. They could find someone else willing to take your job. But now, imagine if all the workers went together. Everyone's standing in unity, represented by a common voice. That's what a union does. It's not one person knocking on the door. It's an entire workforce saying, hey, I think we deserve better. And when that many people are pushing together, the company has to listen because they know their entire operation could be impacted. Let's talk about executive pay, especially in unionized versus non-unionized companies. Research shows that in non-union companies, the CEO to worker pay gap has skyrocketed. In many non-union workplaces, CEOs are making 300 to 400 times the average worker wage. But in unionized companies, that gap is much smaller thanks to unions negotiating fairer wages for all levels of employees. The reason for this difference? Well, it's because unions push for collective bargaining agreements that limit excessive executive compensation and ensure a fair distribution of income across the workforce. Meanwhile, non-union companies don't face the same pressure, allowing executive salaries to balloon while worker wages stay relatively flat. And remember that big surprise I teased earlier? Hang tight. We'll get to that soon, but keep this pay gap in mind because it's all connected. Have you ever scrolled through your social media feed or tuned in to an opinion-based news channel and heard anti-union messages? You might have seen ads or headlines claiming that unions are just bad for business, they cost jobs, and they drive up prices. These kinds of messages are often promoted by the big companies with the money to shape the narrative. As I revealed in my video, hey, think you're in control of your Facebook feed? About 70% of people get their news from social media without fact-checking it first. And that's where many of these messages come from. I believe you might have been told those things, but that doesn't make them real. I'm going to link that video at the end so you can watch it next. Now, corporations like Walmart and Amazon and others have invested heavily in anti-union campaigns, using slick marketing to push a message that unions are the problem. But what they don't tell you is that these campaigns are designed to keep wages low and profits high. And here's the thing. Workers don't always get the same platform to tell their side of the story. So it's easy to see how people can be misled by one-sided arguments. That's why it's so important to think critically about where these messages are coming from and who stands to benefit. Now, before we get into more numbers, I want to share with you a personal story. In my decades of helping people with financial troubles, I've had a front row seat to see how unions work to support their members. My company and I were brought in by large unions in the automotive and pharmaceutical industries to provide financial education and help workers struggling with difficult financial situations. What struck me was how deeply concerned these unions were, not just about the wages and benefits, but also about their workers' mental health and overall well-being. They wanted to ensure that their members had the resources they needed, whether it was assistance with managing debt or dealing with unexpected crises. These unions paid for the services because they understood that financial stress and personal struggles can affect a worker's life, both on and off the job. The unions weren't just focused on negotiating contracts. They were there to provide support when their members really needed it most. Have you ever heard someone say, when unions push for higher wages, it makes everything more expensive for the rest of us? Well, it's a common argument, and it sounds like it makes sense, but let's break it down. Here's the truth. The cost of living is affected by a lot of things, way more than just wages. Think about housing prices, which are driven by supply shortages, or even energy costs, which rise and fall based on global markets. Then you have healthcare costs, which go up for all kinds of reasons, like innovation and insurance policy changes. Even if unions negotiate higher wages, that doesn't mean prices go way up for everyone. Often the increases are small and businesses can absorb the costs. Plus, when workers have more money, they spend more, which helps the whole economy grow. That means more jobs and more money circulating, benefiting everyone, even in your local market. Let's talk about Walmart. Have you ever heard about companies actively fighting against unions? Well, Walmart is a prime example. They've spent years pushing anti-union messages through training videos and presentations. They tell workers that unions are just businesses looking to take their money from their paychecks. But what they don't tell you is how unions help employees negotiate for better pay and working conditions. Walmart goes as far as telling their managers to look for signs of union activity and report it. They want to stop unions before they can even get started. The problem is when companies push back like this, it doesn't just hurt Walmart employees. It hurts workers everywhere because without unions, wages stay low and job protections weaken. Ever heard someone ask, hey, why should I have to pay union dues if I don't want to be in a union? Well, it's a fair question. Nobody likes paying extra, but here's the thing. Those dues go toward negotiating for higher wages and better benefits and workplace protections. Even if you're not directly involved, the union helps set a standard that benefits everyone in your workplace. Think of union dues like insurance premiums. You pay into a system that gives you security and collective power when you need it most. Whether you're facing layoffs, health and safety issues, or negotiating for a raise, those dues are what help secure better outcomes. And without dues, unions wouldn't have the resources to fight for fair contracts or legal protections for you. Let's talk about Amazon. You've probably heard that workers at Amazon have been trying to unionize to improve their pay and conditions. Amazon says they don't need a union because they already get paid well enough. But here's the problem. Without a union, workers don't have as much leverage. If Amazon decides to cut benefits or make them work longer hours, what can one person do? Probably not much at all. Unions give workers the power to speak together. It's not about one person against a giant corporation. It's about a whole group fighting for fair treatment. Without that, the only choice workers have is leave and hope the next job is better. And here's where we start to see the bigger picture, a clue that leads us to that shocking number I mentioned earlier. Here's something else you don't hear often. There are companies that actually embrace unions. One of the best examples is Costco. Costco has a strong relationship with the Teamsters Union, which represents many of their employees. The result? Costco is one of the most profitable companies in retail, while also being one of the best places to work. Their CEO has publicly said that paying their employees well and working with unions leads to higher employee loyalty, lower turnover, and a more productive business. So, the next time you hear that unions hurt businesses, remember Costco, because they prove that treating workers fairly can actually be good for business. Now, here's that part I promised, the big surprise. Did you know that if wages had continued to grow at the rate they were before in the 1970s, the average American worker today would be making around $44,000 more per year? That's right, 44 grand more. That's how much wage stagnation has cost us since unions lost much of their power. Here's the connection. When unions were stronger, they fought to make sure that productivity gains were shared with workers. But as unions declined, wages stopped keeping up with productivity. Workers became more productive, but most of the financial reward went to the top CEOs and shareholders. Some might argue, well, if wages had grown like that, wouldn't prices just have gone up too, eating away all those gains? Yeah, but here's the reality. While some prices may have risen, productivity has steadily increased over the years. That means we're producing more than ever before, but workers aren't receiving a fair share of that value. If wages had kept up with productivity, the rise in the cost of living would not have canceled out that extra 44 grand in income. I mean, imagine what an extra $44,000 a year could mean for your life. Better vacations, more retirement savings, or maybe just not having to worry so much about bills. That's what wage stagnation has cost millions of Americans. Now let's imagine a world where unions didn't exist at all. What would life look like for workers? Well, without unions, wage stagnation would likely get even worse. Companies wouldn't feel pressure to offer better pay or benefits. The gap between CEOs and workers would keep growing. Middle class would shrink, and we'd probably see fewer protections for workplace safety. Overtime pay and benefits like healthcare and pensions would become even rarer. In industries where unions are weak, we already see lower wages and less job security. Without unions, it would be a lot harder to push for better working conditions or fair treatment. Workers would have little bargaining power, and if you didn't like how your company was treating you, the only real option would be for you to leave and hope you could find something better somewhere else. And now you know more of the story. If you like this video, watch this one next to keep learning. Until next time, see ya!